Okay, thanks everyone for joining. So this is the first session for the Future of Living track. And we'll mention a little more of that after these two sessions. I'll do a brief introduction to our two speakers, and then we will have two sessions, and we'll kind of take it as it goes. We'll do a presentation, discussion, and then after that we can begin the next one, depending on when that finishes. So I'm super excited to introduce the upcoming speakers, both for the actual sessions they'll do, but also just to introduce them to Zuitzerland and the wider Zuzulu community. I think there's a lot of interesting alignment there and mutual interests in a way that is quite serendipitous, I think. One simple way I like to think about Zuzulu and the pop-up city or pop-up village movement is it's fundamentally like an innovation around clustering people. So maybe a simple way to think of it is X number of people in Y location for Z duration. I think that's a non-trivial innovation in the 21st century to bring these people together. And you can see by the testament to how many. There's something like 40 to 60 of these that have happened since the first Zuzulu in Montenegro 2 years ago, which is pretty insane. But they're a bit of a crossroads, I think, the movement now into what's next. 40 to 60 of these pop-ups all around the world, pretty incredible, but I think it's clear that there's some roadblocks there. Not being super plugged into a jurisdiction, like, are we contributing to places? And also from an innovation perspective, there's only so much you can do in a short duration. If people are dispersing after, that just has big questions around, what are the lengths that you can actually, what things you can commit? So with that in mind, I think Shajay and Alicia both fit at this wonderful intersection of big ideas and also appreciation of trade-offs, which is to say they actually build things in real life and have been doing so for a while, and so they can really perfect to meet this community now. So a little bit more about each, and then we'll get started. So Alicia is the founder of the Circular Factory, and anybody here been to Prospera in Roatan, Honduras? Yes, some. People who have been there all have seen the Circular Factory, the big robotic arm. That is Alicia's company that is in robotic construction. And also professor of architecture at the University of Calgary. And I thought I'd add this in to really give a sense of what I mean by alignment. Here's a paper title from Alicia from last year. Decentralized, data-informed, robotic-based digital timber microfactories. I feel like there's any paper title that would fit the wider Zuzulu community, that is it. And so next, moving on to Shajay. Shajay is an architect at Zaha Hadid Architects and co-founder of CODE, ZHA's computational design research group. So also quite aligned here. So I'm super excited to introduce Shajay to start.
Thank you. So thanks a lot, Chance, and also to Una, even though like in this particular instance, like the introduction to Zuzulu came through Chance, but I know Una from the time I was doing my PhD at ETH here in Switzerland. And between Alicia and myself, we're hoping to, as Chance said, introduce or convince most of you that architecture should be as integral part of the Zuzulu mindset as the rest of the topics of longevity, cryptography, and crypto economics, and so on. Because we do think the architecture as a discipline has evolved considerably and has a lot of alignments, as Chance just mentioned, with the ambitions and also the technologies that are powering Zuzulu and decentralized communities. So that's the context of where we are saying a architectural stack that can talk to the rest of the stack in terms of physically making some of these communities happen. And why we come to this, as a company at Zaha Hadid Architects, we're also aligned with this mode of thinking, technology-enabled urbanism and architecture, because for the last 50 years, we have now built in 25 different countries, about 100 projects, deeply impact the urban environment and deeply impact the economy in which they're situated, across across the G25 countries, let's say. And one of the things that this enables, like 50 here runway in a way, is for us to begin to think about like connecting back with the 20th century paradigm, like which transformed the planet, both for good and like not so good reasons or outcomes. Like, there was this movement called the Bauhaus, like it was a short-lived movement from 1918 to about 1930, where a lot of, it was quite similar to Zuzalu in that sense that there was a lot of investment into new modes of knowledge and new modes of production. Here is like Joseph and Annie Albers like talking about curved origami introduced into a design curriculum. And so even though it was a short-lived design movement, like it had like a deep, it helped prepare like the architectural and urban fraternity to rebuild nations immediately after the Second World War, like with these iconic showcase buildings that were enabling nations to like commit people to come together and back into cities and rebuild their culture, let's say. And so architecture was an instrument of change. And it also enabled a lot of innovations to be tried and tested, which later made its way into the mass buildings that we see across the globe, including mass residential buildings like these that we now see across the world. And therefore, it also impacted urbanization throughout the 20th century. So what started as like a small like-minded people, like from various disciplines actually, coming together and with the interest in technology and interest in new forms of inquiry, like by the end of the century, completely transforming the planet. So we believe like we're in a similar moment of cumulative, collaborative enrichment, like which would potentially lead to disruption, right? Like, so we start with simple ideas that experiments, which we already seen in the last 15, 20 years, like things that we did in 2008 in India, like as experiments, like $1,000, $2,000 experiments, like now feeding like large projects like stadiums, museums, and so on, and then further on to houses and cities. So in all of these, like we found like kind of a first principle exploration, the key to collaboration, and like not to have like deeply structured education, but like just to explore collaboratively from first principles. So largely, like I've experienced in the last 20 years of my career at Zaha Hadid Architects, like 4 distinct episodes, like retrospectively, if I think about it. A deep interest in like computational geometry, so and second, like a application of that to robotic fabrication. And the one topic that I will talk about today more in depth is games, video games for consensus building, and how that kind of also leads to the next immediate topic of like AI for cities. And so here's like a kind of visual sense of like what these first principle experiments were like for like when we started in 2004. Like there was a lot of excitement around computer graphics, you know, like tooling, like processing and so on, which were coming out of MIT around that time. Like, so it introduced architects to these kind of ideas from computer graphics and computational geometry. And similarly, like around the 2012 period, there was like interest in robotic application of robotic processes to non-industrial, non-automobile domains like architecture and so on. So digital fabrication, which the NCCR, which in ETH came about at around the same time, like around 2012. And also there was a distinct period like around leading up to the COVID pandemic, like from like around 2016, there was a interest in Unity and like Unreal Engine, like and all these kind of games and how architecture could interface with that, and particularly for consensus building, which is what I will talk about, as I said. And that kind of leads to this topic of like AI for new cities, like which is something that we are beginning to invest collaboratively across most professional circles in architecture. So why this interest in cities? Like because architecture is a very social domain, a discipline as much as it's a technological And cities, like even the word comes from like the roots of, share its roots with like other words like civilization, other words like citizens, and so on. And so, and cities, like it might not be as prominently known outside of architecture and urban circles, that like they do actually are a fundamental contributor to GDP. So you can see that like all the high GDP countries like are actually deeply, very much urbanized. Like, and so, and it's almost like a linear graph. Like the more urbanization, more GDP, and that's also one of the main reasons why China brought it like a large amount of its population out of poverty through city building, a very deliberate city building exercise. And what's interesting also, if you compare New York and London, like city building is a deliberate act, like which can have a deep impact not only in the economy but also in the sociology of a city. So London, thousands of years of evolution, and New York, not so many, like just 2 centuries, right? Like, and so population roughly similar, 8 to 9 million. GDP about 3 times more in New York. But what's more interesting is like GDP per square kilometer, so-called economic density, is like 4 orders more, right? Factor of 4 more. So that's the extent of impact you can have if you deliberate about like the decisions, like the way New York did about like 2 centuries ago, and which we now believe this is a very exportable, prosperity enhancing invention, right? Like that. For some strange reason, the U.S. never repeated that experiment, but like places like Hong Kong have taken some parts of it, and like there are definitely other countries that are looking at New York as a case study. Like, and what did New York get right? Like one of the key things they got right, like was the idea of fungibility. Like so, like land was like broken down into these fungible packets, like plots, like that, like enable developers to bid for land and develop templates like that they can rapidly scale up the city, like which is not the case in London, like where every plot is unique and like it's very non-standardized. And they also came up with like lots of innovations, built so-called air rights or alienable rights, like which is what air rights is. Like you can sell your air rights to your neighbor, and that promoted a lot of kind of unique ways to encode like health of a city, so that you don't like block light to somebody else, and so and the other innovation they did was also zoning, like not always right, but because they segregated zoning, there was residential areas and then industrial areas and so on. In some areas leading to like kind of decay, but the zoning map of New York is one of its also a good example of its innovations. And all of these were deliberated among groups of people, some who were architects and urbanists, but most of them were actually general people from various walks of life, including politicians and so on. So that, I think, alludes to the importance of like thinking about these things like collectively. And also like the Central Park, like, and was a competition for creation of public space, like investing in public space and including the libraries around that Central Park and so on. And not only that, like they got the standardized template designs, like they had a template for high-rise and they had template for various kinds of houses, like tenements, like for multifamily housing, young people, like artists, like studio housing and so on. So there were 6 or 7 types of houses all across New York, like which you can still to date see. And so all of these together is why like kind of New York really was able to build very quickly in about two centuries and like kind of supersede like New York in a short, supersede like London, despite its much longer history. So broadly, we can think about this urban planning, urban design, and architectural design all integrated and deliberated in one integrated system, right? So that's what we would like to bring about in this, allow for people to think about the trade-offs involved in planning, understand trade-offs involved in urban design, architectural design, and so on. because we do, as I said, believe our cities are a recent architectural invention, with something we should, as architects, be all very proud of, because it really affects like almost all of the population of the world. Like, and cities only occupy 1% of the surface area of the planet. And it accounts for more than 80% of the wealth of our civilization. So, and by extension also, like, most of the pollution problems, right? Like, and the world needs, like, 250 plus more Londons or more New Yorks. And like places like India, Africa, like, definitely need more cities to uplift its populations. So the expectation is by 2050, there will be about roughly 2 billion more people in cities than they currently exist today. So, and that's where we think like AI could have a very critical role, like helping people and community the complex trade-offs between economy, ecology, prosperity of citizens, and so on, that the built environment like kind of intangibly controls, like we want to make that more tangible, right? And that's where we think games have like a enormous potential to make that happen, because games already do make complex information more accessible, and it's a way of thinking about trade-offs without being an expert in one of the domains, right? And traditionally, if you think about cities, like, as you will soon think about like a permanent hub, like the way is to think about a location, and then like you think about an energy source, and then you think about some housing, and then you think about services, and then think about transport, and then last comes culture. So this is a very linear way, like most cities have been thought of in the 20th century, but we can flip all of this and like kind of bring all of it, like integrate all of it from the get-go. And many people have talked about this, like just, Alain Berthaud, like order without design, kind of thinking about cities as labor markets. Jane Jacobs, like an urbanist, urban geographer, urban economist, who's written and was a great advocate for Greenwich Village in New York, and like many other aspects of New York, and she eventually retired in Montreal. And also Frei Otto, who's like an architect. He kind of thought about simulating how cities grow and how human beings occupy and connect within territories. And that these are all kind of phenomena that could be understood equally in a scientific way as any other natural science topic. And so many of these ideas are embedded in like SimCity and City Skyline, like, which is a successor to SimCity series, where like you as a mayor or like a player have to maximize the welfare of the citizens, like within your game, right? Like, and when we look at the literature that like goes into design of these city builder games, like they're referring to exactly all the topics that I just mentioned, like architectural design, urban planning, urban zoning. And like when you play the game, you're not actually thinking about these topics, but you're intuitively engaged with that, and you're really engaged with the trade-offs that are involved. And so in that sense, like the city builder games think of land and communal resources as like a kind of farming, right? Like where do you put towers? Where do you put like residential buildings? Because all of it like has a effect on the net GDP or the net welfare of the citizen, right? Like, because if you get any of these things wrong, like maybe like you will end up with like a less prosperous city. So that's what's at stake. Like if you, it's extremely path dependent. Like if you first put a hospital, like it becomes a hospital city, like Philadelphia. Or if you have a financial institution that comes in first, like London, then because of the port and like it takes on a different culture, right? So, and through games you can accelerate that time and kind of predict this economic dimension and the social dimension of the built environment. And how they do it is like, it's also a beautifully abstract system, like allows us to reason about the urban environment, right? Like, so first is you as a player, like assign so-called land use, meaning where are residences, where are offices, where are green areas, where are energy supply, and so on. So you make this layout and then assign land use, which is what urban planners do. And then you also have to grapple with like economics, like because for every road that you lay down, you need to, you have to take a loan, and then you have to generate revenue to pay back the loan, and which is also how cities work, right? And what's beautiful about these games is like the idea of the Sims. So every citizen is actually has a life within the game. They wake up and they go to office, or they have go to recreational areas, and they complain about like roads being too long. So there's a mechanism by which to evaluate citizen happiness within what you're doing. The way you're laying out the roads actually affects the end citizen. And all of this is simulated by literal human agents that are walking around in the city having a life, right? Like an accelerated life. Like so that mechanism is like very beautiful, like something that we can build on and explore the bottom-up emergent aspects of cities, which is deeply emergent and non-linear. So it's not an optimization problem, right? Like it's more a path-dependent forecasting problem. And so we've been trying to build on this idea of like, okay, rather than have one mayor, like why can't we have like representative players? Like each player has a representational constituency. Like so a player has to take care of all the residential buildings, another player has to take care of all the commercial, and then there's also a fifth player which is about citizen welfare. So we can take this single player game and make it a 5-player game, and eventually we can make it a multiplayer, hundreds and hundreds of player game. But like this is sufficiently complex enough like for us to begin to reason about games and its architectural use. So each of these players has a kind of profile and a tendency to do certain things, like invest in, if you're a residential developer, you will invest in land which is closer to green areas or like further away from noisy areas and so on. And if you're a commercial developer, you're aligned closer to the roads and things like this. And with just this mindset, like you can play this monopoly on any kind of like urban, like this happens to be in London, and you can like kind of see it's like turn by turn game playing, and you can begin to forecast like, you know, what are the things that are important to the various players, like and these could be likely future scenarios in which the city might grow, right? Like, and so this is just a computational thinking. We are not literally coded it up. Like we just played like four of us got together and played this game. And so it's students from the Design Research Lab at AA in London. And so that's the context in which like we're framing the architecture and urbanism as a including like the game theoretic principles of incentive design, and all of this can come into play. And what's exciting for us is like since 2024 there is a resurgence of interest in reinforcement learning and agentic AI and so on. So it aligns very well with like the fact that we have been trying for the last 6-7 years to make this into a game. So it kind of like now we can just get the AI agent to play the game and kind of look at like all these trade-offs that might emerge, right? Like, and so this is an illustration of like a potential kind of Markov sequence that like the reinforcement agent can discover. Like where to put what. Each color is like a kind of building, like residential, like commercial, and so every time you place a building, there's a cost-benefit analysis. So it could be simplified into a kind of Markov chain, right? Like, and that's the idea, like for what we are now trying to explore, and so the idea is to predict win-win situations for both for the city and the citizen, and once we have that, like we could also convert like the exact same tiles into physically buildable architectural tiles. So we have idea of how much it will cost, how much material you would need, how much carbon it will take, and so on. So it doesn't need to be only boxes, like it can truly be inhabitable virtual spaces which can then later be physically realized. So we can convert those box actions into actual geometry. And so we can explore many scenarios like this, right? Like a potentially agent could like think, okay, maybe I should build 3 towers or 6 towers or no towers. And so all of this becomes possible future outcomes, and a three-dimensional use of land, not just two-dimensional use of land. And so that is the context in which, like, I will leave you with this project, like, which is the first project that we were looking into physically realizing some of these ideas, like a pilot project in Roatan, which is an island off of the mainland Honduras, like, and it's a startup city called Prospera, Honduras, and when we first met, like, the developers, like you know, they said they want to create a city, and like they have like less than $1 million. Like, we were, you know, we both loved that ambition, but also you know, more were aligned with this kind of naive way of thinking that, like, you know, yeah, we could kind of make it happen. So it's taken a long time, and we have still not realized the first even buildings, but that's the global vision, that, like, once that red area is built, a pilot project, like, there's also ambition to build out like a much bigger, let's say, development. And so to make these two things happen, like, we proposed these hypothetical companies called Configurator Company and Circular Factory. And Prospera has actually invested and built Circular Factory, which Alicia will talk about more, how much effect it's already having. But like the left side, like the Configurator Company, didn't actually make its way to be a company, but like a lot of that thinking really has evolved quite a lot since. So on the Configurator side, like, we used the Unreal Engine game engine and built this browser-based game. So you would go in, select some pixels, like in 3D, and also customize the interior of your house, and you know, get, like, whether you want like a 2-bedroom layout, a 5-bedroom layout, and so on. And then also walk around and take a look at, like, how much of the ocean you can see from your house, and who your neighbors are. That's the key part of the configurator, is less about configuring the interior spaces, but like configuring the community, which is unlike a car configurator, right? Like a car configurator, you only configure like the trim and like so on, but here you can actually choose who you want to be neighbors with. And what you want to share with your neighbor, like you want to share some parts of your house with the neighbor. So that was the intention of calling it configurator, is like configuring like the spatial layout of your community. And then in the meantime, also get feedback about trade-offs involved, like how much it's going to cost. So you don't build stuff like in the sky and then without thinking that you need to put columns underneath and so on. So it's just making visible these kind of intangible trade-offs that would otherwise be difficult. And so this is enabled with borrowing ideas from like 3D air rights from New York, where like users who are non-expert in architecture, they just purchase using tokens like these, well, not DeFi tokens, but like just tokens, like Monopoly tokens, these 3D pixels, like, and behind the scenes, we calculate what kind of buildings could actually fit within the pixel world, right? Like, so corner units, like middle units, tall units, horizontal units, all of this is taken care by the architectural system and not a burden on the community or the non-expert. And so in order to do that, it's a lot more work for us as architects. Like, we have to create this kit of parts, and each kit has to be then costed, and we also need to know that these kits will combine reasonably well. Of course, some of the combinations will be meaningless, like, you know, you might have the roof on the ground and columns on the sky, but also we have to test that like most of the combinations will result in meaningful outcomes. And so this is another scope for kind of AI assistance. And what one of the benefits of this was that, like, we knew ahead of time like which of the layouts would be preferred by that particular community, like, you know, 2-bedroom units or like a tall studio unit, like, so we had like 9 or 10 layouts that we had a short list of, and within that, like, most people only preferred 1 or 2. So there's also kind of interesting outcomes. So now we can like design these in greater detail, right? Like which is flipping the design process usually. And so again, like all of these are enabled by a kit of parts which can be physically constructed, which Alicia will talk more about using the circular factory. But like because like we have the circular factory, we know how much effort it takes and how much it costs to convert raw material into the finished product, right? Like it's a near site factory that converts raw material into the finished building. We also know how much labor is involved, like how much machine time is involved, like, and so all of this can be fed back into the early stages into the configurator. And one of the other benefits of like this integrated system is that you don't have to design only one unit and stack the units. You can now think of all the units together as one single building. And this has many benefits, like in the sense that when you integrate structure across the building, you can save, up to 50% in material, because you can design the bottom part of the house to be stronger because it's carrying more weight, and the upper parts of the houses can be much lighter. So there's an economic benefit, there's a material benefit, and so on, because you've configured it ahead of time. So you don't have to make a universal unit which is over-designed for most uses, right? Like, and so that's the, so this is where we are at, like where we hope to realize this little cluster, that red blob that you saw in the few slides ago. But if that is successful, like we could expand it out to other building types, co-living, student housing, and so on. And so these ideas, like the physical realization, Alicia will talk more about how the social innovation angles as well, like, and I will leave you with this little video of like some of these ideas. Alongside, we made a Fortnite demo, which 500,000 people played in like the first 5 days. And you will see that what's in this video, as you can see, in like about 3 to 5 minutes, people can spray these 3D pixels and visualize how their spaces could be like, and it's also collaborative. It has the 4-player idea, and so residential versus offices, and all of this was created by kids as young as 7 or 8, and it's truly, in that sense, a wisdom of the crowd. Everything you see here created by kids, very young players. And a lot of them are very architecturally meaningful, right? Like, and yeah, so that's the kind of AI that we also think about, like a kind of wisdom of like human AI, right? That, so yeah, like with that, I will take pause here and invite any questions. Otherwise, I can keep talking for a very long time. So, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. Your comparison of New York and London was very much on economical value, and comparison only based on this cash flow creation in New York without taking into account other kind of parameters of the city. So I'm curious, since we're here, the idea is to build a hub more value driven and based on specific mission. How can architecture actually help in creating something mission driven to maximize that part, not economical?
Yeah, good question. I mean, GDP or economic measures are, a proxy for. It's just a unit of account, right? You could measure other things, like if you want to include within this metric, you could have ecological measures like carbon footprint and carbon credits. And the point I'm trying to make is that architecture is important, is to think about planning and forecasting the effect of the built environment on the welfare of the city, like economic welfare, ecological welfare. You could think about social welfare as well, like of, you know, you could measure how frequently you interact with, how frequently these agents interact between their places of work and their traveling to places of living. How often do they meet others? Like, so that could be one of the ways, like you can measure things like, you know, how lonely a person could be in a city. Like, for example, Los Angeles, most of the time, like the city is so sparse, like most of the time people are in their cars, right? Like, or there's not that high frequency of interaction. Whereas like both New York and London, like you are likely to meet a lot of people on the streets. Like, and so the built environment has a deep impact on all the things that like are important, like to including, you know, welfare of like the community, interaction density, and so the idea is to, like, I only use the economic density as a example, and I'm not saying New York is better than London in all dimensions. I'm just saying, like, thinking about the implications of design and thinking about how to capture some of these metrics is an important activity.
I will clarify my question. If we have zones and the standard building templates as a kind of good options to create faster economical growth, do we have the same thing like pre-researched architectural templates to kind of develop community and mission-driven organizations?
Yes, I would think so. Like, for example, London also had some templates. Like, it had the live work template. Like, it was called the Top Shop. So you would live and you would have your carpenter or have the shop in the same building, and that created a lot of guild-like communities. Yeah, so there is definitely, and Amsterdam similarly has architectural templates that enable a certain kind of urban fabric and a certain kind of urban community. And also New York, like these templates enable a kind of worker community, like high density tenements. Like some of it was horrible living conditions, but like some of it is actually now worth like thousands of dollars in rent. Like the studio apartment, you know, with the tall ceilings and so on, it was designed for artists, like and that's why they became like quite expensive over time. And yes, so definitely there are architectural templates that you can, the history of it, but you can also design specifically for an outcome in mind with, if you want a social fabric that you want to create. Like if you want to encourage like this kind of co-living, you can definitely create smaller rooms, like, but more shared spaces, right? So your people are kind of not going to be like in their own rooms because the rooms are so big, but they're kind of want to come out more often. So which is the case in Hong Kong, for example. Like the rooms are like so small, most of the people are always outside. Like and so yeah.
There's actually a tool that's called Reality OS. It allows you to like incorporate the digital identity.
Sorry, can you say this again, please? Thank you.
There's actually a tool called Reality OS developed by the same guy that created the Cry engine. And he's now exploring the ability to like layer on like your digital identity onto the digital twin. So like depending on like what attestations you have with your digital identity, they can like do like clusters. This is where like persons with this type of identity is and so forth. So there's like tooling being designed.
Really fascinating presentation. When you mentioned querying AI to kind of simulate what type of development may be needed, and would it be possible to kind of query the AI and tell us where to build new cities around the world, depending on economic factors? Will that be possible in the future?
Yes, I mean, as Balaji says, like all the things that are needed for network states, including the architectural technology, exist today. We just need to rehash it and one of the, it's a very important question as to like where to build new cities or if to build new cities, right? Like, and one of the ways we think that could happen is if you reduce the threshold for experimentation. And so like you know, like it should be okay to like try building as many new cities, and some of them may not work. Like, so you try to reduce the threshold of experimentation, and these kind of technologies are definitely one way to do that. Like where you try to typically a new city will cost like in the order of billions of dollars of investment, but that's maybe with like nodes like Zuzalu, like that could be brought into the order of magnitude of millions, right? Like and a few millions everywhere, will then enable the communities to discover these synergy clusters, right? Like where to build what kind of city. If there are 1,000 experiments happening in each region of the world, like then some of them might not succeed, and the others will, aggregate like all the citizens of other experiments. And so AI is definitely helpful, like, but the real AI is actually human with human crowds that like kind of take these exploratory decisions and experiments like these. Like, I mean, it might, sustain itself and become like a bigger city, or it might have to pair up with like, Zuitzerland might have to pair up with Zoo Berlin. I don't know, like, like that. That might happen, right? Like, yeah. So to reduce cost of experimentation is a key, I think, in our before enabling AI. AI can actually help, like, but the bigger help would be to reduce cost for experimentation. Yeah.
Hi. So I believe the real reason your company is interested in cities is that your, I guess now former boss, Patrick Schumacher, became an anarcho-capitalist, in the early noughties, right? And, that must have been a very, I guess, let's say, it must have been very contrary to what most of the other employees and managers, believed in. And I'm just curious, like, how it affected the company internally. Was there a war of any kind? Like, how has that affected recruitment? How has that affected client relations? Just give us the insider story, please.
Well, yeah. We are an employee benefits trust, and that's something that Zaha encoded in our will, and all of Patrick's opinions are his opinions, and many of us are actually we have affinity to certain of his architectural ideas, certain of his entrepreneurial ideas, like and since we are not, most of the employees are not from Europe. And so we don't have any background in the kind of ideological aspects of this discourse. Like, so I wouldn't know what anarcho-capitalism is. I mean, I wouldn't even know what really capitalism is, like, because my idea of it is like colored by where I'm from. Similarly, many others in the company are from like Peru or China. Like, so our 95% of the company is like non-native to the UK. And which is what like Zaha actually really enabled, like, and to the large credit, it's also like Patrick who enabled that, bringing the most interesting characters together. And so yeah, there's always disagreement, not only now, but it's always been, disagreement is our way of being successful, like, and because every idea is deeply contested. Within the practice, before, I mean, it might seem that we're unified on the outside, which is true, because we are an employee benefits trust, like, and so, which means that the brand of the company is a collective asset, like, So and if we lose a client, like everybody loses a client, right? Like and so so that's why like Patrick's opinions are independent of how the company runs and the clients we make. He has a vote as any other senior director, and this is something that is not particularly new within the company, which is all like there's a precedent also in Foster and Partners, like which became, it's not an employee benefits trust, but they also have a similar structure where partners have equity, and so that's the incentive mechanism by which like the company is making sure that no one opinion like supersedes others, like, and so so that's one, and like a lot of these ideas actually coming from Patrick, not so much from a kind of ideological perspective, but to promote innovation and invention in our profession. Because if we don't build, if we don't experiment constantly, we are not getting good as architects, which is unfortunately the case for most of Europe. Like most architects in European nations, like they get to build one building in 5 years. So it's clearly you're not gonna get as good as somebody in Indonesia building like 50 in a year. So so some of what Patrick says is to kind of really, goad people out of like this kind of decelerated trajectory, which is very detrimental to our profession. Yeah.
A quick one and then a deeper one. Like, is this Fortnite build still on?
Yes.
Can you share the island code on the Telegram at some point?
Yes, I will send it to Chance, and yes.
Thank you. That will be fun. I forgot my Nintendo though, so,
Yeah.
but still, it'll happen later. The other one is it's always fun to see like Jane Jacob and these names up on the screen, but like I'm very curious. And this is not a fully formulated question, but I'm very curious about how you see these network stakey things coming up, because it's like a kind of like a Le Corbusier kind of mindset applied with a leverage in this Jane Jacobs kind of narrative. So I'm very curious if you see any dangers of these gated communities sprouting across the world, taking over like this narrative of like, oh, we're in community and we're doing this and that. So yeah, it can be a coffee later also. But
yeah, no, it is a deliberate choice. Like, and many people point this out, like to me and others also, that how I can take Jane Jacobs in the same breath as Corbusier, right? And because they seem mismatched, which is true on the outside. Like, but in reality, like when you think about making cities, like you need like clearly people with like a kind of insane vision. To overcome like the many hurdles that will definitely come up, right? And at the same time, like Jane Jacobs is very, very important counter figure to also consider, like that like we shouldn't think of cities as an optimization problem, right? Like as was pointed out by the first question, but it is a kind of effective resource utilization problem, right? Like if you think about societal resources as something that like should benefit as many people as possible, right? Citizen welfare maximizing. So that's where we think like these two potentially contradicting poles are very useful to always have in mind, because city building is in some sense a kind of activity of imposing a kind of will onto the land and so on. But at the same time, there's a societal aspect that we should pay heed to. So yeah, it's just to have these two poles and remind ourselves like that city building is, it requires both for sure. Like because one cannot really exist without the other.
In games, life is different than the reality. And when you build in Skyline, you can really demolish everything and rebuild because citizens aren't happy. How can you reconcile that with real life? How can we build without affecting people?
Yeah, good question. Like, it is, I mean, it's not exactly reality, obviously, like, but there's an abstraction of the critical processes at play. And like, for example, I was talking to Chance this morning, like Tokyo is a constantly rebuilding city, right? Like, it's not built once and like stuck there forever. Like, because of their earthquake code, because of their other even societal ownership processes, like, or not many people own buildings and or houses in Tokyo. The building has a life cycle of like 15 years, right? Like, so, you know, like parts of Tokyo change every 15 years kind of like rapidly because of this. But the negative effect of that is that like nobody really invests in the architecture of a building. Like you will unlikely to find like really, they will be well-maintained buildings, but they're not extraordinary buildings, you know, very few. And some which are extraordinary are likely to be temples or like something from like 6-7 centuries ago, right? Like, and so it is possible to reconcile, cities do grow in phases, right? Like the first wave of urbanization is usually these dingbat houses, which are like made cheaply, and then after that, like the next wave will be a better set of houses and better set of buildings. So yeah, like Skyline cities is in that sense capturing that process of regeneration that is always happening in cities. Like we might not pay attention to it, and maybe in Europe it's a bit more static, but most North American cities, even though North America is almost 100% urbanized, there's constant re-urbanization happening all the time. Like malls get torn down, new houses come in, and yeah. So yeah, architecture that recognizes that buildings need to be torn down will be better. So design for disassembly is a key topic because disassembly and destruction is constant in our cities. Yeah.
Okay, we'll cap questions for now. Thanks a lot, Shajay.
Sure.
Let's have a few minutes if everyone has to go to the bathroom, and then we'll start in 5 minutes for the next session.